Everyone knows Cleopatra died by snakebite. Most picture it as something romantic. A queen defeated, a lover lost, a woman who chose death over surrender. Poetic, the stuff of legend. But that story is missing something. Cleopatra didn't fear death. She feared what came before it. She'd seen it happen to other queens. She knew exactly what Octavian had planned. When she pressed that asp to her skin, she wasn't choosing death over life. She was choosing death over what Roman victory meant for conquered queens. And that choice tells you everything about what really happened the night Rome's legions won. Roman conquest wasn't just about territory. It was about breaking spirits, erasing identities, making examples that would echo through generations. And for queens, for the women who dared rule, who commanded armies, who challenged Rome's dominance, the Romans had developed something systematic, something documented, something so brutal that even historians who recorded public crucifixions and mass executions struggled to find words. If you want to see how deep history's darkness goes, drop a comment with your city and country, because what you're about to hear, they don't show in Hollywood. Let me show you what Cleopatra knew, what she died to avoid, starting with a queen who didn't have that choice. Her name was Zenobia, and in 272 AD, she ruled an empire that made Rome nervous. She wasn't just a queen, she was a conqueror. She commanded armies, spoke multiple languages, rode into battle on horseback alongside her soldiers. And she didn't just defend her kingdom, she expanded it. Egypt fell to her forces. Parts of Asia Minor fell as well. Territories that had belonged to Rome for generations suddenly answered to a woman who called herself Augusta, a title reserved for Roman empresses. Rome didn't just hate her, they feared her, because Zenobia proved something dangerous, that Rome could be challenged, that Rome could lose, and worse, that a woman could be the one doing it. But empires don't tolerate challenges, and Emperor Aurelian was coming. The siege of Palmyra lasted months. Zenobia's forces fought hard, but Rome had more soldiers, more supplies, more time. The walls held, then they didn't. And when the city started falling, Zenobia knew what happened to queens who lost to Rome. She tried to escape, loaded supplies onto a camel, and rode for the Euphrates River, hoping to cross into Persian territory where Rome couldn't follow. She almost made it. The river was in sight, freedom was hours away. And then Roman cavalry appeared on the horizon. They surrounded her, pulled her from the camel, bound her wrists. And that night in Aurelian's camp, Zenobia learned what Roman victory actually meant. The tent was surrounded, not by guards protecting her, but by soldiers who wanted revenge. She could hear them outside, hundreds of voices, drunk, angry, describing in detail what they wanted to do to the queen who had killed 70,000 Romans, what they would do if Aurelian gave permission. Her daughters were in the tent with her, teenagers terrified, listening to the same voices, understanding the same threats. Officers came to Aurelian's tent that night. They had a question. The queen who murdered Roman soldiers, the woman who stole Roman territory, the Augusta who insulted Rome itself, what do we do with her? And some of those officers had suggestions, specific suggestions. They'd earned this, hadn't they? This was spoils of war. This was justice. Let the men have one night, just one, then she'd be broken enough for the triumph. Aurelian said no, not because of mercy, but because he needed her intact. He needed her beautiful. He needed Romans in the capital to see her walking in chains, conscious, aware, humiliated but not destroyed. Not yet. The destruction came later. The destruction was public, so he posted guards inside her tent, not to protect her, but to protect his investment. And all night, Zenobia and her daughters listened to soldiers describing what those guards were preventing, what awaited them in Rome, what Roman victory really meant for queens who dared resist. Dawn came. The voices didn't stop. The preparation began the next day. They shaved her head first, a Roman humiliation for captives. The hair that she'd worn in elaborate styles, the hair that marked her as royalty, gone. Then they stripped her of her royal garments, the silk from Persia, the gold from Egypt, the purple that proclaimed her status. All of it removed. They dressed her in a slave's tunic, coarse fabric, degrading. And then came the chains. Not iron chains, but golden chains, because Rome had a sense of irony. You wanted gold. You conquered for wealth? Here, wear it. 60 pounds of it. So heavy she couldn't lift her arms. So heavy she couldn't walk without help. The weight pulled at her wrists, cut into her flesh, made every step, agony. But before they took her to Rome, there was one more thing. Her son, the one who had fought beside her, the one who had believed in her vision of an empire that could stand against Rome. Aurelian had him brought to her tent, and then he had him executed right there, in front of her. They wanted her to understand, wanted her to know what happened to those who raised swords against Rome, wanted her broken before Rome ever saw her. Now she was ready. Now she understood. And now the real torture could begin. The journey to Rome took weeks. Zenobia walked in those golden chains, in summer heat, with no shade, no water unless Romans decided to give it. And every town they passed through, every village on the road, crowds gathered. Word had spread. The queen who challenged Rome, the woman who thought she could be Augusta. They threw things, rotten food, stones, worse. They shouted, called her whore, called her worse, described what they'd do if they could reach her. And Zenobia walked, because stopping meant being dragged, and being dragged meant more pain. Her daughters walked behind her, also in chains, also being pelted, also hearing the threats, the specific threats, the descriptions of brothels, the promises of what Roman men did to daughters of defeated queens. And finally, after weeks of this, they reached Rome. The triumph parade was scheduled, the greatest spectacle Rome could produce. Proof of Aurelian's victory. Proof that challenging Rome ended in chains. The parade begins at dawn. Zenobia stands at the starting point, those golden chains weighing her down, cutting deeper into flesh that's already scarred from weeks of wear. She can barely stand. Slaves have to hold the chains up so she doesn't collapse under the weight. The crowd roars. Thousands of Romans line the streets. They've been waiting for this. The queen who dared, the woman who thought she could be their equal. And now, look at her. The parade moves forward. Zenobia takes a step. The chains pull. She stumbles. The crowd laughs. They throw things. Rotten vegetables, feces, stones. One hits her face. Blood runs down her cheek. She keeps walking. Every few blocks, the parade stops. A senator steps forward, reads from a scroll, lists her crimes. Territory stolen, Romans killed, the audacity of calling herself Augusta. The crowd boos, screams, demands punishment, demands worse. And the soldiers who march alongside the parade, they're close enough to touch her, close enough to grab, and they do. Hands reaching through the guards, touching her, groping her, describing what they wanted to do, what they'd been denied that first night in Aurelian's camp. The guards push them back, not to protect Zenobia, but to preserve the spectacle. She has to make it to the end. She has to survive this, because Rome wants to see her crawl. 5 hours of this. The heat, the weight, the pain, the humiliation, the hands, the voices. Her daughters behind her, experiencing the same, hearing the same promises about brothels, about what happens to pretty girls whose mothers lose to Rome. And Zenobia walks, because what choice does she have? The parade ends at the Forum. Aurelian gives a speech. The glory of Rome, the price of resistance. He points to Zenobia.
This is what happens. This is what Rome does to those who challenge us. Learn this lesson. Remember this woman.
Then comes the twist. Aurelian doesn't execute her. He gives her a villa in Tivoli, a comfortable life, a pension, guards to protect her. Everything a former queen could want, except freedom. This is Rome's mercy. This is what submission earns you. Fight us, and you walk in golden chains, but survive the walk, and we'll let you live in comfort. As our trophy, our proof that resistance ends in surrender. Zenobia lives there for years in that villa with those guards, never allowed to leave, never allowed to return home, never allowed to forget that she's alive because Rome permits it. Some sources claim Aurelian forced her to marry a Roman senator. Not love, not choice. A final humiliation. The queen who ruled the East now belongs to Rome completely. Even her body, even that. And Rome watches, and Rome learns. This is mercy. This is what happens when you're lucky. When Aurelian likes you, when Rome decides to be generous. But most conquered queens weren't lucky. Most didn't get villas. Most got what Zenobia spent that first night hearing about, what those soldiers wanted to do, what Rome's victory really meant. Let me show you the pattern, the system, what Rome did when mercy wasn't on the table. 50 years before Zenobia, there was a man named Vercingetorix, Gallic leader who united the tribes and nearly defeated Julius Caesar, but nearly isn't a victory. And Caesar didn't accept anything less than total surrender. When Alesia fell, Caesar made his terms clear. Vercingetorix could surrender himself and spare his people, or watch everyone die. Vercingetorix chose surrender, walked out of that fortress in chains, thought he was saving lives. His wife thought so too, his children. They watched him go, believed Caesar's promise that surrender meant life. Caesar lied. The moment Vercingetorix was secured, Caesar's officers moved in, seized the family, separated them. The wife never saw her husband again. Didn't know he'd spend 6 years in a Roman prison before being strangled during Caesar's triumph. Didn't know because she'd already been distributed. That's the word they used. Distributed. Like supplies, like equipment. Defeated leaders' families were rewards for officers, payment for service, spoils of war. Vercingetorix's wife became the property of one of Caesar's commanders. Not a servant, not a slave in the household sense. A concubina captiva, a captive concubine, which meant exactly what it sounds like. She had no choice, no voice, no rights. That first night, still in the clothes she'd worn watching her husband surrender, she belonged to a Roman officer who'd earned her through conquest. And the children, separated, sold. Sons became slaves or gladiators. Daughters went to whoever paid. The family that Vercingetorix thought he'd saved by surrendering was erased within days. This wasn't cruelty. This was policy, standard practice, documented in Caesar's own writings. Matter of fact, no drama, just the business of empire. Defeated leaders' families were assets, distributed accordingly. But here's the thing. Rome didn't just do this after defeat. Sometimes they did it before, as a warning, as psychological warfare, to show what happened to those who resisted. Ask Boudica. Boudica was a British queen. Her husband had an arrangement with Rome, a client kingdom, autonomy in exchange for tribute. Then he died, and Rome decided they wanted more than tribute. They wanted the kingdom. Boudica refused. This was her land, her people, her daughter's inheritance. Rome had no right. Rome disagreed, and Rome sent soldiers to explain their disagreement. They came to her home. These weren't negotiators, these were enforcers, and they didn't come to talk. They flogged Boudica publicly, in front of her people, stripped her, beat her, made sure everyone watched, made sure everyone understood. This is what happens when you say no to Rome. But that wasn't the worst part. Her daughters, teenagers. Rome's soldiers took them right there, in front of Boudica, in front of her people, in front of everyone who needed to learn what Roman conquest meant. And they victimized them, both of them, not hidden, not quietly. This was a theater. This was a message. This is what happens to the daughters of queens who resist. This is what Rome does to those who think they have rights. Tacitus wrote about it specifically, documented it, because it was so horrific that even Romans who'd seen everything found it notable, found it worth recording. That's how bad it was. Boudica didn't start the rebellion because she wanted to. She started it because Rome had already done the worst thing imaginable. What was left to fear? What could Rome do?